Welcome back. This is the weekly performance report. I ended the week down 4.11%, which sounds radical, and I guess it is to some extent, but that is on the back of 2 weeks where I was up 5% apiece. So it only makes sense to give some of that back, and maybe all of it back in the upcoming weeks. And I'm not really concerned about it. I actually think I might be beating the S&P now at this point. Of course, that doesn't really matter, but it's kind of interesting, and I'll tell you why it's interesting. The first 2 months, I underperformed the S&P. First month, I underperformed the S&P, and then the second month, I underperformed the S&P. And then the third month, I caught, at one point, I had a 10 percentage point spread underperformance to the S&P. And I was like, whew, this is not looking good. It's not a good way to start the year. And even though there's a lot of year ahead, 10 percentage points is a lot of ground to make up. But this is the funny thing about investing. And this is why I suspect a lot of people say you're just gambling and it's all random and you have no control over things, and those kinds of expressions people make that they're trying to use to gaslight you and coerce you into not trying and improving your life. So what happened? Well, in March, that 10 percentage point spread that I was lagging the S&P with at the end of February became we'll just call it 6 percentage point lag, because I had a 8.5% performance in a month. Well, then in April, this is what's interesting. In April, the first 2 weeks, the first week I was up 5%, the second week I was up 5%, and now I'm down 4%. And in this time so far in April, I believe the S&P is down, 4.5%, 5%, something like that. So I'm really closing that gap. So let's say I'm at 5% year to date, according to this picture, which doesn't factor in April, but I was at 5%, S&P, we'll just call it 11%, and I then went up 10%, down 4%, so I'm up 6% on the month, okay? So I closed the gap. If I'm at 5% year to date, the S&P was at 11%, I'm up 6% so far this month, then I've now closed the gap. But it's not just that. The S&P's fallen, we'll just call it 5%. So I'm actually beating the S&P. So talk about a radical shift. None of this is bragging or future expectations. Next week it could reverse. But it's interesting to see for 8 solid weeks, me just underperform worse and worse and worse. And then essentially in 7 weeks, so roughly the same time frame, I go from underperforming by 10 percentage points to outperforming by, 5 percentage points. So I went from one end of the spectrum to the next end of the spectrum. It's just kind of interesting, that kind of radical volatility. The same thing happened at the end of year last year, which I've noted, and I won't note again, but it was looking real close there come, I can't remember, end of October, maybe end of November, and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to beat the S&P, and then bam. Same thing here. It's just interesting observation. Plus, I don't really have anything else to say other than that. I added a share of Valeris to my account this past week. It's kind of funny. These people, they'll be right eventually, but like the millionth time of, don't buy the gap up in oil names Monday morning after a headline of what's going on in the Middle East. And they're like, don't fade the oil trade. Things are ratcheting up and blah, blah, blah. And then bam, just oil stocks take a beating all week long. Monday through Thursday. I think Valeris was up on Friday. But it's just like, it's funny. So I bought that dip. It kind of hit a proprietary buy zone, let's call it that. So I added the share. I don't really have any cash, So I can't really add much of anything. I think I have, yeah, I don't, a meaningless amount of cash, let's just say. So I bought a share, see what happens. Valeris is one of those things that, I mean, you see I'm up less than 2.5% on it. It's one of those companies or stocks that's gone nowhere really for, I mean, it's been range bound with a lot of volatility of 20 or 30%, similar to Transocean, over the last year and a half. It's pretty much flat for a year and a half. So, see what happens. St. Joe's another great example of that, which is interesting that what my second and I believe, yeah, my second and third largest positions are companies that have done nothing besides bounce around a lot for a year and a half. So hopefully that doesn't go awry. I believe I did touch upon the tax consideration for the Canadian LPs last week. That did not happen. Canada just plans on strangling its companies more to siphon money off of them. So now my only two red positions are Organigram and Kronos. So that's like 1.5 per. It's not a meaningful position, but irritating nonetheless. And probably, I mean, who knows? That they actually shook it off. They didn't tank or anything like that. So it seems like not much was really priced into the markets. I don't know what else we have going on here. Talk about. I don't know. I don't really have anything else to talk about. Just a quick recap. So that's that. Thank you for watching. And until next time.